Well, in the case of short-range missiles, 10 seconds is about 10 seconds too late. Yeah, Katyusha's, this isn't going to work.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all the daughters and other children here today on Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. We've got Ms. Gertz and Ms. Burns. Who else? Who's back there?
Andrew and Matt.
Andrew and Mac. Welcome. Come anytime. You can ask questions too. If you have any questions you want to ask, just stand up and ask them. I might even answer them. I'd like to start with a couple of announcements. First, in about an hour, the Secretary will give a very important speech on national missile defense at George Washington University. It will be piped in here, but of course I invite you to go over there. The first 20 people will get free tickets to the next phase of the Kennedy auction. I'm sorry, George Washington.
It is George Washington.
It's in George Washington. Tomorrow, the Secretary will give the keynote address at the 1996 Latin American Symposium in Miami. This is sponsored by Southcom and the National Defense University, and he'll be talking about the Defense Ministerial of the Americas 1 year later. Finally, I have a whole lot of General and Flag Officer announcements which are available in DDI, but I'll call your attention to just two. The President has nominated Vice Admiral Archie Clemens to the appointment of the grade of Admiral, and he will be assigned to be commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. He's currently the commander of the 7th Fleet in Japan. And the second I'd like to call your attention to is that Vice Admiral Dennis Blair will move from the CIA, where he's in charge of military programs, to become the director of the Joint Staff here, replacing Lieutenant General Walter Cross, who, as you know, is being promoted to the rank of general and will become the Commander-in-Chief of the Transportation Command. So with those announcements, I'll take your questions. Charlie.
Is the Secretary opposed to putting the Pentagon's part of the intelligence budget under the Director of Central Intelligence? Is that why he didn't testify at the meeting, or is he opposed to that?
Let me answer the second part of your question, because when you ask a multi-part question, I get to choose the part I want to answer. The reason that he did not appear yesterday was because the hearing began as a narrow hearing on the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, but was expanded over time to a broader range of topics. And the Secretary felt that because the Intelligence Committee does not have oversight jurisdiction over the Defense Department, it would be appropriate for him to deal with this broader range of topics before the Senate Armed Services Committee. So he has offered to appear before a joint meeting of the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee. That is why he did not appear yesterday. There were rumors floating around that there was a rift between the Secretary and Dr. Deutsch on intelligence reform, and that is not true. I'm sorry, the other part of your question?
Does the Secretary oppose putting the Pentagon's substantial part of the intelligence budget under the Director of Central Intelligence, removing it from the Pentagon and putting it into the civilian realm?
They're still working out the details of the intelligence reforms, but basically they have been able to resolve almost all the differences that their bureaucracies have brought to them. There are still other matters that haven't been resolved, and they will be resolved, I assume, amicably over time. I don't want to get into the details right now, but basically they meet twice a week. They've met twice already this week. That's Dr. Deutsch and Dr. Perry, and they are working together very smoothly to put these reforms and reorganizations into place.
So you're saying that the Secretary does not oppose putting a substantial...
I'm saying they're working on these issues. I don't know exactly how many they've ticked off, but I don't anticipate that they're going to be huge problems. Ivan.
Separate, different subject?
Sure.
The The General Accounting Office has come up with a draft report suggesting that perhaps the FA-18 ENF program be canceled to save up to $17 billion. Two-part question, please, Ken. One, do we know who originated the request for the report? And two, what is the department's position on any cost saving which would do away with the Super Hornet?
Well, first of all, as much as the Pentagon would like to control the General Accounting Office, we do not. So I think that questions about who initiated reports should best be put to the General Accounting Office, which is an agency of Congress, and they can answer those. On the question of the Super Hornet, that's what you're talking about, the F-18 ENF program, which is...
The Navy wants to buy about 1,000 of them over the span of many years, and is the department's position still the same, that give the Navy the aircraft that it's needed, wanted, all of the above?
We have not changed our view on the Super Hornet program. Remember, the GAO report is only a draft report right now, and it's a work in progress. I don't believe there's been a firm Pentagon. I don't believe they've taken into account the Pentagon response yet. I'm sure they'll be persuaded by our response and want to change their recommendations when they complete the report. Bill.
House Speaker Newt Gingrich has reported today. He said that he was concerned that U.S. military assets, naval ships, and surveillance aircraft were enforcing an embargo against Bosnia at the same time the administration had secretly allowed Iran to ship arms to Bosnia. I wanted to get your response to that. And secondly, do you have a cost estimate, or can you get a cost estimate for the cost of those enforcement operations between April '94 and November, when they formally stopped enforcing the embargo?
Well, first of all, the implication of your question is that the embargo was set up only to prevent arms from going to Bosnia. Of course, that's not true. The embargo was set up to prevent arms from going to Serbia as well. It was to try to contain and limit the fighting as much as possible in the former Yugoslavia. The question that you asked, of course, will be answered, I'm sure, in the course of one of the many hearings that seem to be ahead of us on this issue. I think it's important to focus on what happened here and what didn't happen. There was not a violation of the embargo. Weapons from several countries were shipped through Croatia. Some stopped in Croatia. Some of the weapons went on to Bosnia. The sea sharp guard was an embargo at sea. The weapons, as far as I know, that came into Croatia from Iran came by air. In fact, the first shipment was in a 747. The administration faced a very ticklish situation here. It was pointed out to us many, many times by Senator Dole and others in Congress. The Bosnian people were dramatically less well armed than their Serbian opponents were, and there was a perceived need in Congress and within the administration to find a way to balance the forces. Faced with that challenge, the administration decided that it was, everything else considered, an acceptable risk to take to have some arms leak through the embargo to Bosnia. That's what happened. And I think that the decision helped lead to a stronger Bosnian force and a stronger Federation force. Remember, the Federation between the Croatians and Bosnia was created in March of '94, right after the Sarajevo market attack, to strengthen their efforts to withstand Serb attacks. The ability of that federation and the ability of the Bosnian forces to withstand the attacks ultimately helped lead to the Dayton Peace Accord. There was a careful weighing at several times throughout this period in 1994 of concerns about Iranian influence in Bosnia and concerns about the survival of the Bosnian forces and the Federation forces. And when those were weighed, the administration reached the decision that I described. The multilateral arms embargo, which was imposed by the United Nations, was not something we supported. And we proposed to the United Nations the ending of the multilateral arms embargo. The United Nations decided not to end it. We decided that it would not be right to breach the embargo unilaterally by shipping arms to Bosnia. And in November of '94, as you know, Congress took away our right to enforce the arms embargo. Or that's when the Nunn-Mitchell legislation took effect, I think November 15th, 1994. So from that day on, we didn't have a right to participate in sharp guard in an enforcing capacity, and we didn't.
But until that time, we were engaged, and we spent a lot of money, presumably, for our ships to interdict shipping and also our surveillance aircraft to presumably...
Well, as I said to you, I think you're taking too narrow a view of this. The embargo was not set up against any one group or country. It was set up against all the warring factions, and it was an effort to reduce the fighting by choking off arms flows, in particular to the Serbians. So,
as well as the Bosnians too.
That's right, so you should look at the overall embargo, not just one part of it. Jamie.
Well, you said, and I don't have your words exactly here, but you said that it was an acceptable risk to take to allow some of the arms to leak through. That would seem to imply that the United States, had it wanted to, would have been able to stop that.
I'm not sure that's the case. As I said, there were arms from several countries coming in. We were one part of an operation. It was, as I said, it was a multilateral operation, largely with European participation.
Just to be clear, was this leakage something that it was within the power of the United States to stop, if it had wanted to?
I don't believe it was. I do not believe it was.
Just to follow up on that, what was the United States' role in the land part of the embargo, which is what we're, like you said, what we're talking about?
Well, I talked about air. And
right. We're not, as you said, the main point of the discussion has been that the naval embargo, which didn't really affect these arms shipments by air. So what was the U.S. part of stopping air traffic into that?
We were not interdicting flights going to Croatia at that time.
Or from Croatia into Bosnia?
Certainly not flights going to Croatia.
You say that it was not a violation of the embargo. No matter which side of the situation you're on, how is allowing and condoning leakage and circumvention of the embargo not a violation of the embargo? Simply because the United States...
A violation of the embargo would have been shipping arms in violation of the embargo. That's not what we were doing.
So knowingly allowing the circumvention of the embargo, even though you didn't actively say it, is not a violation of the embargo.
What happened was we were asked a question. Would we take a position? And we said we would not take a position on the shipments of arms from Iran through Croatia into Bosnia.
No, I understand, but what you're saying is, again, that I'm just asking directly that knowingly allowing or condoning circumvention of the embargo is not a violation of the embargo.
We did not violate the embargo.
When you say we were asked a question, you mean the United States was asked a question by whom?
By President Tudjman of Croatia.
Did Secretary Perry approve of the no instructions policy, the no instructions decision?
You and I talked about this yesterday, and I'll tell you now what I told you yesterday, which is that the issue was discussed by the administration's top foreign policy advisors, and what the line the discussion took was to weigh concerns about Iranian arms provisions on the one hand with concerns about keeping the Federation going and the Bosnian forces capable of fighting on the other. It was weighed against the backdrop of our view of the fairness of the multilateral arms embargo on the Bosnians. They were severely disadvantaged by this because when the former Yugoslavia broke up, they were left with a much lighter force, less well-armed force than the Serbs were. So they were always fighting from a significant disadvantage. Against that backdrop, weighing the two factors that I talked about, the administration made the decision that it did.
Was the issue discussed before the decision was made with the Secretary involved?
The issue was discussed at times when it was possible to influence the decision. Yes.
Changing topics. Yesterday.
No, can we stand at the same time for a second?
Sure.
The issue of the weakness of the military weakness of the Bosnians was a continuing problem. It didn't start when President Tudjman approached the U.S. government. Had Secretary Perry participated in discussions before President Tudjman's request came in as to the issue of whether the U.S. Could, in some fashion, find a way that other parties would supply arms to the Bosnians?
I'm not going to get into the business of talking about private conversations the Secretary had. I've given you a general discussion, a general description of discussions within the administration on this topic, and that's as far as I'm going.
Discussions prior to President Tudjman's request?
David.
It's also on Bosnia, but different if everybody wants to keep going on the embargo. There seems to have been a fairly substantial change in plan here on the withdrawal of American troops from Bosnia, in which originally people had been talking about starting to pull out in June or July, and now you're basically saying that you're going to keep the force. You might reconfigure it, but you're going to keep 18,000 odd troops there right up to December 20th and then begin the
Yeah, let me walk you through that. That's something that that has been talked about in piecemeal from this platform and other places over the last few months, and let me try to make it as clear as I can. Initially, there was talk about beginning a drawdown in the summer. We were asked by the OSCE to keep, IFOR was asked to keep the full force there until after the elections. One of the primary accomplishments of the IFOR force is to make freedom of movement possible to a much greater extent than previously. And freedom of movement obviously is crucial to effective election campaigning and effective getting out the vote. So IFOR has agreed to remain there in full force until after the elections, which I believe are now scheduled for late September. General Shalikashvili said in Europe earlier this week that this means that there probably would not be any drawdown of the U.S. troops until D+270, 9 months into the mission. General Jowen said here 6 or 8 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, that he wanted to leave a significant force in Bosnia until the end of the mission, which is D+20. As he explained it, the mission will end on D+20, but all the troops won't be out by the mission will end on December 20th, 1996, but all the troops won't be out by then, because he doesn't want to have a skeletal force on hand on December 20th. He wants a significant force there right up until the last day. So that means that it will take a month, maybe longer, to get all the troops out after December 20th. What the chairman also said earlier this week, and what Admiral Smith has said, is that between now and December 20th, there could be some reconfiguration of the force. That generally taken to mean that the force may be lightened up in some way. There could be somewhat fewer tanks and maybe replacing combat soldiers with trained MPs and Humvees who might be able to move around more quickly than the tanks would be. This is something that's being discussed, but it hasn't happened. So, yet. So basically, the mission will end on December 20th, and the troops will come out as quickly as possible after December 20th.
On the part, one more, the
Can I follow
Republic.
up? Can I follow up?
Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
So the full force will be there until December 20th?
Well, not necessarily the full force, but a significant force. I didn't say the full force, but there could be. General Jowen has said that he would like to leave a significant force there. There may be some drawdowns. I suspect that there will be some drawdown of the force starting at the 9-month point, which is D+270. But how large that is and how quick it is remains to be seen. But General Jowen has said that he expects some drawdown before December 20th, but it could be a rather limited drawdown.
Can you define significant in terms of numbers?
I can't.
Would it be reasonable to presume that the withdrawal will, at the same time of the year as the entry, will take about the same amount of time?
Well, it's hard to tell. We won't have to build bridges. We won't have to put navigation aids into the Tuzla airport. There's a lot of infrastructure that has been built and won't have to be rebuilt. A number of roads will have been improved. So I would suspect that we will be able to get out more quickly. We also, as you know, moved in during one of the worst winters in recent years. If we're lucky, we'll have a milder winter when we move out, and that will make leaving quicker. Also, we won't have to phase the troops coming in as we're building up camps and facilities for them, because they'll be able to just vacate the facilities they have. So I would hope that the evacuation, the exit, will be much faster than the entrance. Ivan.
Also on the former Yugoslavia, in the general terms, it would seem that the transport plane carrying Secretary Brown was in violation of Air Force regulations, at least MAC regulations, about landing in that Croatian airport under instrument conditions. I know the investigation is not complete, but can you give us some guidance as to how this disparity is shaping up?
Well, as you pointed out, the investigation isn't complete, and I just don't think it would be appropriate, as I said on Tuesday, to get into parts of a much broader investigation. When we have the facts put together, we'll tell you what they are.
Any idea as to a time frame?
I don't have an idea right now. We're working as fast as we can.
I think Bill
Yeah.
On Prime Minister Perez's visit this weekend. In addition,
I'm coming back to you.
in addition to missile defense, what are the topics on the table? And specifically, is there going to be any discussion of any kind of mutual defense agreements or arrangements?
Well, the main topics here will be on ways to maintain Israel's qualitative edge, and this will involve missile defense systems, rocket defense systems, and early warning systems. We will also continue discussing a topic that Secretary Perry and Prime Minister Perez launched in January when he was in Jerusalem, and that is, what should the relationship be, the security relationship between the U.S. and Israel be, or between Israel and other countries in the region be, after a comprehensive peace agreement. This seems, unfortunately, a somewhat less urgent topic today than it did in January, but we will continue to talk about future security arrangements, both on a bilateral and regional basis involving Israel.
Also on the early warning, what are you talking about for early warning?
Well, it would be basically early warning that could be tied into missile defense systems.
Talking about satellite ground stations, something of that nature?
I think we'll talk about details on Sunday rather than before. I think it's always better to talk after the meeting than before the meeting. I know it runs counter to the journalist code, but the bureaucratic code says it's better to talk after meetings than before.
On
Bill.
the issue of the Iranians in Bosnia, Republican critics are saying that this policy has allowed the Iranians to have a foothold in Bosnia, and it is also complicating efforts to conduct the arm and equip program for the Bosnian military. Could you comment on that, whether you agree with that or disagree? And secondly, there are reports of Iranian assassination teams in Bosnia. Is this something that poses a threat to U.S. troops or the NATO troops?
To take your last question first, are you referring to the New York Times article today?
Well, there were European press reports and the New York Times article.
The New York Times article, I think, referred to Iranian-trained assassination teams. We're obviously looking closely at those reports. We know from the raid several months ago that there was significant Iranian training going on. We believe the Iranian presence has been diminished significantly in Bosnia in the last couple of months, and I think that it's diminished to such an extent that the equip and train program will be able to begin relatively soon, in the next few weeks, because of the decline in the Iranian presence, as well as the fact that now money has been raised internationally to help fund the program. It should be off the ground, as I said, sometime next month.
So the arming and training would begin even though all of the Iranians or foreign forces have not left the country?
That's not what I said. It will begin when we're satisfied that they've complied with the foreign forces provision. I think we'll be in a position to be satisfied relatively soon. We've been dealing with the Bosnians on this issue for a long time, and our views are very well known to them. So, and they've responded.
Well, then let me ask, will the train and equip program begin if any foreign forces remain in Bosnia?
It will begin when it's certified by I-4 that it's appropriate for it to begin, and we expect that we'll be in a position to do that sometime next month. But until we actually reach that time, we won't know. But we think that we're close.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sorry.
Yesterday, the President issued an executive order setting the line of succession to the Secretary of Defense. Is it for the first time for Pentagon to have such an order?
I'm sorry. Your question has caught me totally by surprise, and I'll have to check into that. We do have a Deputy Secretary of Defense and have had one for some time, but I think I better check the facts of the executive order, and we'll get back to you.